I'm really huge fan of tailwind CSS, and now version 4 come up and I have to reevaluate my reusable components. And in today's episode I would like to show you few of building blocks which I'm using on almost every private project which I'm writing on, and also for my clients. So stick with me and you will see pretty nasty implementation of reusable building blocks in Tailwind CSS v4. Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Daniel, and on this channel I'm showing tips and tricks for programmers, how they can develop their careers in IT industry, how they can be better front-end developers, full-stack developers in TypeScript ecosystem. In today's episode, we will speak about Tailwind CSS v4 and reusable utilities, which I'm using on almost all of my projects. That happened, I had to rewrite them because Tailwind CSS v4 come up. So I will show you today few useful utilities which I'm always using in my project. So let's dive in. First of all, let's talk about setup. This is standard Tanstack Start projects, and for my styles I'm using Tailwind CSS v4. So you can see global CSS, it's nothing fancy here. I'm just setting up dark mode, I'm setting up variables for foreground, background colors and for borders. My application, and I'm using those variables, yes, in body tag. So it's like nothing fancy here. This is global setup, and as you can see, I'm using import from every layout folder and index CSS. And this index CSS itself has all of my building blocks, custom utilities, which I'm normally using in my private projects. Side note: every layout is a cool concept. If you didn't know that, and if you didn't heard about this before, I highly recommend you go to every layout dev and you will see building blocks which authors of those ebook are presenting here. So I based my Tailwind CSS v4 implementation on those ideas. So I highly recommend you to read this ebook, buy this ebook. I think it's around $60 right now. But going back to some explanation, on every project you will need some fancy, useful building blocks which are really useful, and you can use them all over on your projects. And I have 6 of them which I selected from every layout components, which I'm using almost every time. And I would like to show you Tailwind CSS implementation for those building blocks. So let's jump to the code. And as you can see here, I have in my index CSS, I'm exporting few of the utilities. Let's start from the box utility. For each utility, I'm creating also markdown files with example usages, because then it's easier for LLM to use them in my projects. So box utility is nothing fancy. It's like for creating consistent bordered containers with padding. And based on every layout box pattern, this utility provides a flexible way to create visual distinct content containers with customizable spacing, borders, and color schemes. And this is really useful if you would like to create cards or something like this. You can see here basic usages like div with some class, and implementation itself looks like this. So I'm using like Tailwind theme. I'm setting up some variables for my theme here. And also I'm using some utility from Tailwind. Yeah, and you can see I have this asterisk sign here. This is for using value for spacing for Tailwind. So I'm able to write box -4, box -10, and it will use like spacing function from Tailwind CSS to set my spacing for S1. I'm also setting up border width as a default, box color and box background color. And this is actually implementation. Yeah, so I'm setting padding for the box, which is using like S1 variable right now. Border, which is using like my setted border width or 0 pixels. If this is not set, but it's always like 1 pixel. And I will show you also usages how you can get rid of the border at all. I'm setting also outline for accessibility reasons. If people are using like high accessible mode, they would like to have those outlines always. Color is using box color, and background color is using box background. Why I'm using this? Because also useful stuff is like inverted boxes. Sometimes we would like to invert colors in our application, and I don't like to set always like dark, something like this. and using like inverted values for colors. I'm kind of person which is like to use like stuff like this, like box inverted. I know this box will use inverted colors from my color palette for my global team. And example implementation, I created components here, and the box demo looks like this. So let's see example usages of those boxes. So I will jump to the web page. Let's go back to the box, and here you see I'm using like basic box. So it's like nothing fancy. It's just a basic box with consistent padding. And if you can take a look on the inspect tab, and if we will take a look on the classes, how I'm using this box. Yes. So you see I'm using box -4, and this is using spacing multiplied by 4. So my spacing right now is 0.25 rem, and he is using exactly this value for the padding, and nothing fancy here. The rest is the same. So color is foreground, background color is a background. But as you can see here, for example, below, I'm using like inverted box. Yes. So I'm also using box -4, is the same size as this one on the top, but using extra class box inverted, saying for my browser that, hey, I would like to use for the color background, and for the background color, I would like to use foreground. In that way, I don't have to think about setting those colors in those cases where I would like to use inverted boxes in my application. I just use box -inverted, and it's like set it automatically for me because of this extra utility. There are a few cool usages. You can see you can customize border width, and usage here is like also pretty simple. You just set style, and you just use your variable and set it dynamically for particular use case. So in that way I can customize width of the border whatever I want. I mean, here is like 4 pixels, 2 pixels, 1 pixel border. I'm also using boxes for creating form containers. In this case, you can see like simple usage, like this is also like box, which is using like max width medium, and box 8 means like I'm using like spacing multiplied by 8. This is my padding in this case. So boxes are really useful. Also for code block, box with stack. For stack we will come later. This is like another building block which I really like, and I also implemented in tailwind v4. So yeah, that's the first building block which I always like. I also give some LLM instructions how he can use this, how he can utilize these classes and use them in my projects. So in that way, if I have like file which is like box CSS, which is my utility, this is my base, and box readme for LLMs, which showing like example of usages like with basic box, card component, inverted alert box, nested boxes, custom border width. By the way, you can create a lot of them using LLMs today, so you don't have to write those readme files by your own. You just have to fill correct context. You just have to give box CSS file for your LLM, and LLM will help you provide this example usages and even demo pages. So with this file, I'm able to build complete views with those building blocks just by adding those small pieces and saying LLM, hey, you should use box container, you should use sidebar and stack. So this is the first part. Let's jump to the second really useful component which I using almost all the time, which is actually stack. Stack is nothing else than list with some constant spaces between elements. And if you can see here on those examples, I'm using like stack. Basic stack is setting like spaces between those paragraphs. So I can have also article layout. I'm using stacks also for form layouts, and implementation for stack is also nothing fancy here. As you can see, it's just simple flex container with flow column, no wrap. And I'm using gap, and I'm using also again here spacing function from Tailwind CSS, and also using this asterisk sign, which is helping me, which is allowing me to use like dynamic value. So I can use stack -v -6, let's say, yes. So in the stack readme, this is like also readme for LLMs model. There are also basic usages for this tag. So v4, it would be like all elements would be separated by spacing multiplied by 4. And there are some examples here for LLMs also. So this is like another really useful element, because I don't like always writing like this flex spacing gap for all of my lists. I just like to have one global component, which is my stack, which is like creating those lists for me and those spacings dynamically according to the tailwind CSS. And at the end here, I'm also using like tips and best practices, accessibility consideration, and some performance notes, and like traditional approaches, how people are doing like lists. This is also like extra content for my LLMs models, which is helping LLM to use this stack correctly. Yeah. So this is like also some description with some comfortable spacing, generous spacing and stuff, large section spacing and custom tailwind spacing value. So there are also examples for this. So yeah, this is the second building block, which I always use in my projects. The third one, which is also really interesting, is a center. This is really useful if you would like to center your content somehow. And this is also really useful because, you know, in tailwind CSS, you have this container class, but you have to always set like max width and stuff like this. And I also like to implement my center utility in some particular way. So I'm using like tailwind CSS way. Let's say I'm using like default typographic measure for optimal reading length. So it's like when I'm centering my content, I like to have default value for how width my readable content is. In this case, I'm using 65 characters as a default. And base center utility is like centers content horizontally with optimal max width. Yeah, so this is like base implementation. It's like display block, box sizing content box, margin inline auto, and max inline size. I'm doing like, I'm using here variable, which is like measure, which is set as default 65 characters. But I also implemented center with custom max width values. Yes, so this is like center is like max. It's like default one, which I'm using almost for all of my text content in my web pages. But I also implemented here like with asterisk sign to be able to say, okay, you should center this part of web page, but this part of web page can have like 80 characters width, or can have like 1000 pixels width. And in this case, I'm using just a spacing utility also from tailwind CSS to globally like measure my max width for my content. And you can see also I'm also like sometimes I'm implementing also like some standard containers with scale, which is using from tailwind CSS variables. And you can see I'm using here container 3xx, which in tailwind is like 256 pixels as default. And I'm using here tailwind variables for all of those center minus 2xl. He is using like container 2xl variable from tailwind CSS. So it's like nothing fancy here, but also like some kind of useful defaults. Like center full, it's always like I'm using center and I'm setting max inline size to 100%. This is really useful if you have like paddings which are like dynamic on the both sides and you would like to center your content in the middle. Center none is like max inline size none, and center with text alignment is a little bit different because we would have to say set text align center also to center our text within the center block. So this one is also implementation for center with dynamic padding on the sides. Yeah, so sometimes I would like to set, hey, center for me this block, but on the center certain screen sizes, I would like to set like some dynamic paddings. Yeah, so it's like I'm able to do this by setting like this dynamic values, and I'm also using like spacing function from tailwind CSS. Intrinsic centering is like is also centering children based on their content width. So this is like display flex column and align items center. Example of usages. if you can take a look, we have here like some layouts, white container for dashboard with gutters here. So we have some gutters on the right, on the left side. We have like centered card, text block. We have like full width with gutters here. So if you can take a look, like if you will make this screen size smaller, save his gutters also here. Yeah, so he have this additional spacing within the content itself. So that's another building block. The fourth one, which I would like to show you, is cluster. What is cluster? Cluster is more or less like Flex container with logic behind saying how you should wrap your content. Yeah. So maybe I will jump to the README file here. And this is like creating responsive horizontal grouping of elements. This is really useful in multi-select inputs. For example, if you are selecting tags, you see this really commonly now on web pages, on Vercel, on other pages where you can, in options, you can multi-select some users, for example, and give them some permissions. And this is also like, this provides a flexible way to group related items, and they are wrapping naturally when space is constrained. So in this case, on the demo page, I can show you, let's say we have this tag list, this is like the best use case for this cluster component. And you see, I have a lot of space here. So I have all of my tags in one line right now. But if I will like restrict space for this, the items are flowing like naturally below, and they are creating like third row and fourth row if it's needed. So cluster is really helpful. And how implementation looked like, it's also nothing fancy here. You can see I'm also using like dynamic tailwind asterisk sign and spacing utility to set the gap between elements. And it's like simple flex container with flex wrap set to wrap and gap to use the variable which I'm setting here. And justify content like start and align items center. That's all which is like needed to create proper cluster element. And if you can see here, I'm just doing like default clusters. If I would like to use default cluster, it has like default value 1 rem for gap, and the rest is almost the same as here. Usage is also pretty simple in README here. You can see, for example, for grouping social media icons with gap 4, I'm using cluster -4, and I'm able to use stuff like this, and it looks similar to this one here. Maybe I have some example with social media icons. Yeah, here are some icons here, so you can get the idea. Yeah, social media icons, I have gap 4, so if the spacing would be much smaller, the icons will wrap themselves automatically here. Yeah, so that's the fourth component. We have still 2 of them. Really useful one is sidebar. Probably you know. I mean, you have, if you have like heavily dashboard apps, you need some sidebars in there. You have to also, if you have like nice layout reading content, sometimes you also need this image on the one side and text on the other side. So sidebar implementation is exactly for that. And how I implement sidebar in Tailwind v4 and how I implement this utility, it's also pretty, I would say, complicated in this case. So let's start from the beginning here. How stacking is working in sidebar. So when they are side by side, sidebar has fixed width and content fills remaining space. Yeah, so you need sidebar with fixed width, and the rest of the content is filling remaining space. Like when content can't maintain its minimum width alongside sidebar, Flexbox wraps. So in this case, if the content for the sidebar, I mean with the space for the sidebar is too small, I would like to sidebar utility to make automatically for me this wrapping. So it's like sidebar is going above and the content is going below. This is also what is implemented here. And when wrap stacked, it's like both elements have flex grow 1, so they expand to full width. And the key is that sidebar keeps flex grow 1, allowing it to expand when stacked. Yes. So how the implementation itself looks like for this utility. I'm setting some variables. I'm setting default sidebar width when no specific width is set. So I'm setting this for 20 rem in my case. Default minimum content width as percentage is like 50%, and default gap between sidebar and content is like 1 rem for me. I'm always I like to have these white spaces in my project, so I'm always using this 1 rem as a default. So sidebar utility with default settings, it's nothing else like display flex for the wrapper. We are setting wrap to wrap, and we are setting gap to our default gap. But the key here is now both elements grow to fill available space. Yeah, so flex grow has to be set for all elements in the parent to 1. Now sidebar with custom gap using spacing scale. Here also I created some utility for me to use like sidebar with gaps, dynamic gaps. Also using the utility spacing utility from Tailwind CSS when I can set dynamic gap between elements for the sidebar. So you can see this in example usages, sidebar demo here, and custom gap here. So you can see I have like sidebar left and set gap to 8 in this case. So if we will go back here to our examples, you can see basic sidebar have 1 rem for me, but here I set it like custom gap. And what is really interesting, if the sidebar element itself, you see, doesn't have enough space, then I'm saying, hey, you can wrap, and sidebar is wrapped automatically. It's also the same case for the right sidebar here. If the right sidebar has not enough space, it's wrapping. I'm setting here as default 50% for content. If the content is less than 50%, then I'm doing wrapping. We can do like 1/3 of sidebar also. So if I have not enough space here, then the wrapping is happening also. So that's the sidebar utility. It's really useful, as I said, if you would like to create this sidebar type of thing in your app, or if you would like to create like some article with auto sidebar for the image. This is really, really useful utility. The last one, switcher. Switcher component automatically switch between horizontal and vertical layouts based on container width. So when the container is wide enough, items lay out horizontally. When space is constrained, then stack for layout for items is vertically. Why it is useful? Many times you have this list of boxes and you can say, like until when your content is readable. So I don't like this approach when we have like MD, LG breakpoints. I like to style my apps more like of natural flow. If I see something is not working, I would like to break the pattern and I would like to stack it vertically, let's say. And in this case, I can say like, hey, show me those boxes until the content is really readable. So I can say like with something like this, and then the stack will change, because I know in this case I have not a lot of space for my content, and I can say exactly this is for switcher. The switcher is changing the layout for me based on the width of the container. So I know, okay, if the container has so many pixels, I can show all of those items nicely. But if the container is shrinked until like 200 pixels or something like this, I would like to change this flow to be more vertically. And implementation, it's also not so fancy. So we have the switcher CSS and switch between horizontal and vertical layouts. I'm using some basic switcher here, so it's like display flex, wrap, and I'm using like gap utility from switcher gap variable. And I'm also applying flex properties to all direct childrens. Yes, so I'm doing flex grow and flex basis. I'm calculating of switcher threshold or 30 rems. And in this case, switcher threshold is like minimum width of the children, which is readable for me. Yeah. And in this, you see, I can like say switcher small. It's like where switcher threshold is like 20 rems. And also switcher medium, switcher large. So those are like classes which I am using almost all of my projects. I'm also setting like for all of the children's here proper values. You can see here, I'm just using like default calculations. And in this case, I'm also controlling variants for max items in horizontal layout. So I can also say how many items I would like to have in horizontal layout maximum, and I figure out like I need only up to 5. It's really rare cases when I need more items in one row than 5, so I only implemented those custom classes for maximum 5 items. And how usage is looking like when we see the demo page, for example, you see I have limit 3 with 5 items. Yeah, so if the page if the page would be bigger, I would have all items here, but now I don't have enough space, so I have only those 5 items. But here you can see I set threshold for 20 rems, 30 rems, and 40 rems. And if you can see on expect, and if we will change the width, you will see those items will wrap to the horizontal layout according to the threshold. So if the item is smaller than 20 rem, he will switch the layout. So you can see, for example, here I'm hitting 40 rem for the item on the third example here. So my stack is going to be vertical, yeah. Then next one is 30 rem. So if I'm smaller, I'm hitting 30 rem. Then the next one stack, the second stack is going to vertical. And then the smallest case for 20 rem for items, then the stack is going to be vertical. It's really, really useful if you're building like those flex cart containers to not be really restricted by breakpoints, but by how cart is readable. Yeah, so you can say, okay, my cart is readable up to 20 rem, and below 20 rem is like not that this doesn't have sense to show for the user, and then I would like to switch my layout. So that's it for today. I wanted to show you this 5 really useful utilities which are coming from every layout way of styling applications. I really like this way. I highly recommend you to take a look of this on this webpage, everylayout.dev. If you would like to also to buy ebook, buy it. I bought it already, and it's really, really good one. So thank you for today. I hope you learned something new, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.